June 10th, 2016. Colbran, Colorado. The silence surrounding an abandoned ranch was shattered by a white 1999 Dodge pickup rolling onto the property. A nearby resident noticed a young man step out of the cab and start tossing pieces of fabric stained with dark red marks into the tall grass. About 30 minutes later, a U.S. Forest Service ranger arrived at the edge of the property. Looking through binoculars, he watched as the driver struggled to drag a large bundle out of the house, tightly wrapped in a heavy blanket. The load was so heavy, the young man had to dig his boots into the dirt just to move it. As he forced the object into the back seat, the blanket snagged on the door handle and slipped loose. A pale human hand emerged from beneath the fabric. At 9:30 that morning, deputies from the Mesa County Sheriff's Office and agents with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation sealed off every exit from the ranch. Tanner Flores surrendered without saying a word. Inside the pickup, investigators found an 18-year-old young woman wearing a white shirt and blue jeans, formal rodeo attire. Her blonde hair was soaked in blood. Forensic experts documented 3 gunshot wounds to the back of her head. While detectives transported the suspect to the station, investigators tried to piece together how that truck had traveled nearly 300 miles in 5 hours, from Larimer County to this isolated location. What could drive someone to flee across an entire state with a body in the back seat, hoping pure chance would save them? At the same time, another abandoned vehicle had already been discovered in the parking area near Long Hagler Reservoir, opening the first chapter of this case. To understand the full scale of what happened near the reservoir, it's necessary to go back and rebuild the timeline that led to that day. Ashley Marie Doolittle was born on May 20th, 1998, in Louisville, Colorado. She was the only daughter of Jeff and Anne Marie Doolittle and grew up alongside her 2 brothers, Michael and Brandon. Everything about the family's lifestyle revolved around supporting clear goals and ambitions. The first of those goals appeared when Ashley was just 5 years old. That was the year her parents bought her first pony. From that moment forward, nearly every part of her daily life centered around horseback riding and rodeo competition. By the age of 8, Ashley had already become a regular competitor in the local rodeo circuit. But this wasn't just a weekend hobby. By 2016, her resume looked more like that of an experienced professional than a teenager. She had twice served as vice president of the Thompson Valley chapter of Future Farmers of America and earned a place in the elite 4-H youth equestrian program. In early 2016, during the Boulder County Rodeo, Ashley officially received the title of Lady in Waiting. In the rodeo world, that title is far more than ceremonial. It involves serious responsibilities, coordinating sponsorship agreements, organizing charity auctions, and representing the industry at public events. Ashley was preparing to compete for the Rodeo Queen crown in 2017. She had even created her own mentorship program for younger girls called Princesses, where she planned to teach responsibility, discipline, and proper social conduct. In May of 2016, Ashley Doolittle graduated from Berthoud High School. A clear future was already waiting for her. Acceptance papers from Colorado State University sat ready in her room. She had chosen to study agribusiness, hoping to turn her passion for agriculture into a professional career. Less than 3 months remained before her move to the college town of Fort Collins. Every step in Ashley's life seemed carefully planned, each one leading directly toward success. But behind that polished image of achievements, there was one part of her life she rarely showed on social media or at public events. Her relationship with Tanner Flores had become something far different from the future she imagined for herself. How often does a long list of accomplishments hide a danger that someone quietly tries to handle alone? Ashley Doolittle and Tanner Flores first began dating while attending Berthoud High School. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary teenage relationship. But as their connection deepened, a strict imbalance of control slowly began to form between them. Tanner started imposing rules that gradually isolated Ashley from the people and routines she once knew. His behavior followed a deliberate pattern of control. He dictated who Ashley could spend time with and demanded constant updates about where she was and what she was doing. One of his biggest rules involved college life. Tanner strictly forbade her from attending university parties of any kind. Ironically, Ashley had never been interested in loud parties or reckless social scenes. Her life revolved around horses, rodeo competitions, and the demanding schedule of public responsibilities we mentioned earlier. But to Tanner, none of that mattered. What truly terrified him was the thought that once Ashley entered college, she would discover a world beyond the limits he had built around her, a world he could no longer control. At the core of Tanner's behavior was a growing fear that Ashley would realize her future could be bigger, brighter, and more fulfilling than the narrow version of life he wanted for her. He no longer viewed Ashley as someone with her own ambitions and independence. In his mind, she had become something he believed belonged to him. After nearly a year under that pressure, Ashley finally understood the relationship was taking away her freedom. By early June of 2016, she directly told Tanner the relationship was over. For Ashley, it was the natural conclusion to a difficult chapter in her life. But Tanner refused to accept reality. That refusal became the beginning of a dangerous 5-day period of stalking and emotional pressure. On June 4, 2016, Tanner Flores arranged a meeting with Ashley at Estes Park National Park. He suggested they go on a hike together so they could talk through the breakup. Later, Tanner would claim the day had gone well and that the two of them had rebuilt some level of understanding. But Ashley's actions suggested something very different. For her, the hike was simply another attempt to calmly and firmly make it clear that the relationship had ended. The following day, June 5th, the situation escalated beyond arguments and emotional tension. Ashley was spending the evening with friends at the Sundance Steakhouse in Fort Collins when Tanner arrived uninvited. Witnesses later described what happened on the dance floor. Tanner approached Ashley, suddenly grabbed her by the arm, and forcefully turned her toward him, demanding that she listen. Ashley refused to engage in the confrontation and immediately left the restaurant. In that moment, it became painfully clear that the boundaries she had tried to establish were being completely ignored. On June 6th, Tanner once again convinced her to meet with him, this time near Longhagler Reservoir. Afterward, he began telling people they were back together. Ashley continued insisting the relationship was over. Then came June 7th. Ashley planned another evening at the same steakhouse and sent Tanner a message beforehand, specifically asking him not to come. In response, Tanner used manipulation. He texted her claiming he had accidentally locked his keys inside his truck and urgently needed help. Ashley ignored the message, recognizing it as another excuse to force unwanted contact. On June 8th, Ashley made a mistake often seen in situations involving persistent stalking and emotional pressure. Wanting to preserve some sense of kindness and normalcy, she agreed to ride with Tanner while he dropped off scrap metal. Most likely, she believed that during an ordinary errand, she might finally be able to make him understand that the breakup was final. During that trip, Tanner gained access to Ashley's phone. He discovered conversations with two young men named Tori and Jared. Tanner interpreted those messages as betrayal, completely ignoring the fact that the relationship had already ended. His reaction came immediately. That same evening, Tanner contacted both men and confronted them aggressively. Ashley once again had to explain that their relationship was over permanently. Later that night, Tanner sent her a message that would eventually become a key piece of evidence in the investigation. He wrote that he had given her everything, spent money on her, and that she had been disloyal to him. The message ended with the words, "I'm about to do something stupid. Goodbye." Ashley replied, attempting to defend herself from the accusations. But by that point, she finally understood that even a simple friendship with Tanner was impossible. Do you think Ashley realized that evening that the stupid thing Tanner mentioned was never about self-harm, but about removing the one thing he could no longer control? The next morning was supposed to mark the beginning of a new chapter in Ashley's life. But Tanner Flores had a completely different plan for that day, one that involved an item hidden inside his father's gun safe. Early on the morning of June 9, 2016, Tanner Flores sent Ashley Doolittle another message asking to meet. At that time, Ashley was already in Denver handling matters connected to her future at college. She replied that she would only be free later in the afternoon. While Ashley focused on preparations for her future, Tanner began putting a deliberate plan into motion. He went directly to his father's gun safe. Tanner already knew where the key was hidden, so opening it took only seconds. From the collection inside, he selected a .22 caliber revolver. Investigators would later describe that moment as the starting point of a carefully planned sequence of actions. With the weapon inside his vehicle, Tanner left the house and drove toward Carter Lake, a remote area far from busy roads, and the perfect location for what he intended to do next. During questioning, Tanner would later claim he drove to the lake simply to decompress and practice target shooting, trying to relieve stress after the difficult breakup. But ballistic evidence and the sequence of events told a very different story. The revolver he selected was a single-action firearm. Have you ever stopped to think about what that actually means for someone standing in front of a target? With that type of weapon, the hammer has to be manually cocked before every single shot. It's a deliberate mechanical action that takes both time and focus. Prosecutors would later argue that Tanner Flores wasn't at the lake to relax. He was testing the old revolver and practicing that specific motion repeatedly to avoid any malfunction at the moment he believed would matter most. Throughout the entire day on June 9th, Ashley's phone continued vibrating with incoming messages. Tanner constantly texted her, switching back and forth between emotional declarations and pleas for another chance. In one message, he wrote, "I miss you." Ashley's response was short and cold. "Stop." She was clearly frustrated by his persistence and tried to create distance between them. But her naturally kind personality and her desire to avoid escalating conflict ultimately worked against her. Even so, Ashley agreed to meet him later that afternoon near the reservoir, believing it would be one final, brief conversation to bring closure. While Ashley was driving back from Denver, Tanner had already chosen the exact location for the meeting. It was not random. The area needed to be isolated enough that the sound of gunfire wouldn't attract attention from passing visitors or nearby drivers. Do you think someone genuinely hoping for reconciliation spends hours studying firearm mechanics and searching for secluded locations? Every action Tanner took that morning lacked spontaneity. He behaved like a hunter, checking his equipment and scouting the trail long before his target arrived. By the time the meeting approached, everything was prepared. The weapon tested, the cylinder loaded, and inside the cab of the white Dodge pickup waited an ambush disguised as a conversation. The afternoon of June 9th, 2016 became the official starting point of the investigation into Ashley Doolittle's disappearance. Ashley arrived at the parking area near Long Hagler Reservoir at approximately 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Tanner Flores had chosen the location carefully. It was close enough to home to feel familiar, yet secluded enough to provide privacy for the conversation he claimed he wanted. Security footage and witness statements later confirmed that Ashley parked her vehicle, locked the doors, and moved into the passenger seat of Tanner's white 1999 Dodge pickup truck. From that moment on, her phone stopped responding to every incoming call and message. For Ashley, whose life revolved around strict schedules, rodeo training, public appearances, and preparations for Colorado State University, disappearing without contact was completely out of character. By 7:30 that evening, Jeff and Anne-Marie realized the situation had gone far beyond a simple delay. Ashley had always been punctual, and she never failed to let her family know if her plans changed. Concern quickly turned into alarm. Her parents began driving through nearby areas themselves, checking places where Ashley might have stopped after finishing her business in Denver. Around 8:01 p.m., they discovered her vehicle in the parking area near Long Hagler Reservoir. The car was locked. From the outside, there were no visible signs of a struggle, no abandoned belongings, and no indication that Ashley had left in a hurry. When searching the area around the parking lot produced no answers, her parents contacted the Larimer County Sheriff's Office and requested immediate assistance. Investigators responded quickly, classifying the situation as a disappearance under suspicious circumstances. Detectives immediately began systematically interviewing Ashley's friends and acquaintances. In nearly every conversation, one name continued to surface: Tanner Flores. Friends told investigators the couple had recently broken up, and that Tanner had been in an extremely unstable emotional state. One witness even provided detectives with information from Snapchat. Tanner had posted a message that investigators interpreted as a possible indication of self-harm intentions. But the major turning point in the case came after detectives spoke with Tanner's father. After checking his home safe, he realized that keys he kept hidden separately were missing. Along with them, a .22 caliber revolver had disappeared. At that point, investigators were facing a critical reality. An emotionally unstable young man, armed with a firearm, had last been seen alone with a young woman, now officially listed as missing. An emergency alert was immediately issued for a white Dodge pickup truck with specific Colorado license plates. Law enforcement agencies across the region were instructed to stop the vehicle on site. Investigators attempted to track banking activity and cell tower signals, but Tanner Flores had already anticipated that possibility. Both phones had been powered off shortly after the meeting at the reservoir parking lot. While highway patrol units scanned traffic across Larimer County, the white pickup had already left the region entirely. The search operation rapidly expanded across the entire state, eventually involving agents from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. The night of June 9th became a race against time. Law enforcement searching for a single vehicle across thousands of square miles of forests, mountain roads, and isolated terrain. After leaving the Long Hagler Reservoir parking area, Tanner Flores drove west toward Carter Lake. That route was no accident. Earlier that same morning, Tanner had already explored the area, checking remote stretches of road and isolated locations. Inside the cab of the pickup truck, a conversation unfolded. Details investigators would later learn only through Tanner's own statements during questioning. According to him, he made one final attempt to convince Ashley to reconsider ending the relationship. Ashley remained firm. She talked about college, her future, and her right to live independently. She made it clear there was no future for them together. Tanner later claimed that at one point, he began turning the truck around to take her back. But according to his version of events, Ashley gave him what he described as a defiant look, and that became the final trigger that led to the crime. The forensic reconstruction of the events that followed completely dismantled any claim of an accidental discharge or a split-second emotional reaction. The .22 caliber revolver Tanner stole from his father was a single-action firearm. That detail became critically important in understanding exactly how the crime unfolded. With this type of weapon, a shot cannot be fired simply by pulling the trigger. The shooter must complete a deliberate sequence of actions. First, manually cock the hammer with the thumb until it locks into place. Then aim the weapon, and only after that, pull the trigger. Tanner Flores repeated that process 3 separate times. After each shot struck the back of Ashley's head, he raised his thumb again, pulled back the hammer until it clicked into position, and fired once more. This was not uncontrolled rapid fire. It was a series of conscious mechanical actions. Each time the hammer was cocked, Tanner had several seconds in which he could have stopped. Instead, he continued until Ashley no longer showed signs of life. Immediately after the crime, Tanner moved into the next phase, staging the scene and concealing evidence. He took Ashley's phone from inside the truck and used it to send a message to his own number. The text claimed Ashley had changed her mind and would no longer be meeting him at the reservoir. The purpose of that message was clear: to later convince investigators they had never seen each other that evening at all. Afterward, Tanner threw both cell phones out of the truck window while driving, hoping to prevent investigators from locating them through GPS tracking. He then moved Ashley's body into the back seat and covered it with a heavy blanket, hiding it from anyone who might look through the truck windows. Ahead of Tanner Flores was a drive of more than 300 miles. For the next 5 hours, he drove through Colorado's mountain passes toward Mesa County. At gas stations and intersections, witnesses later described him as calm and composed, never drawing attention from employees or other drivers. There were no visible signs of panic or remorse. He moved methodically toward the abandoned ranch once owned by his late grandfather in Colbran. After arriving late that night, Tanner broke a window in the house to get inside. He washed blood from his hands and face, changed clothes, and then did something that later shocked both jurors and psychiatric experts. He found the television remote, turned on the TV, and started watching cartoons. While hundreds of volunteers and law enforcement officers searched the Long Hagler Reservoir area for any clue connected to Ashley's disappearance, the man responsible for destroying her future fell asleep to the sound of animated television shows, leaving Ashley's body in the back seat of the pickup truck outside the house. The trial of Tanner Flores began in October of 2017 in Larimer County, roughly a year and a half after Ashley's death. The courtroom was packed with relatives, friends from both families, and members of the press. The central legal battle was not about whether Tanner committed the crime. He never denied pulling the trigger. Instead, the case focused on how his actions should be legally classified. The defense argued for second-degree charges, claiming Tanner acted during an emotional breakdown caused by the painful end of the relationship. But prosecutors presented a very different interpretation, built around the timeline of events from that morning. They showed evidence that Tanner Flores had been preparing for that day long before meeting Ashley. The most damaging detail involved the stolen revolver and the target practice session at Carter Lake just hours before the meeting. Investigators emphasized that the choice of a single-action revolver eliminated the possibility of an accidental or impulsive act. Have you ever considered whether something can truly be called spontaneous when it requires manually cocking the hammer before every shot? Each metallic click represented another moment in which a decision was made to continue. Prosecutors ultimately convinced the jury that Tanner Flores had not simply snapped. He carried out a plan he had already prepared, one that included selecting an isolated location and testing the weapon beforehand. On October 4, 2017, the jury returned its verdict: guilty of first-degree murder and second-degree kidnapping. The kidnapping charge was based on evidence that Tanner forcibly kept Ashley inside the cab of the pickup truck, preventing her from leaving before the shooting took place. The following day, the judge delivered the sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 32 years for kidnapping. During sentencing, Tanner Flores showed the same lack of visible emotion witnesses had described at the ranch in Colbran. The town of Berthoud and the entire Colorado rodeo community had already begun honoring Ashley's memory long before the verdict was reached. On June 17, 2016, the same day Tanner was transferred to the Larimer County Jail, more than 700 people gathered at St. John the Evangelist Catholic Church in Loveland to say goodbye to Ashley. The size of the crowd became a powerful reflection of the impact she had made on the people around her in only 18 years of life. In 2017, Ashley was posthumously crowned Boulder County Rodeo Queen, the title she had spent years working toward. Jeff and Anne-Marie Doolittle chose to channel their grief into helping others avoid similar tragedies. They created the Ashley Doolittle Foundation, an organization focused on educating teenagers and families about dangerous relationship behaviors and emotional control during breakups. The foundation identified 10 critical warning signs that are often ignored: obsessive monitoring of social media, isolation from friends, irrational jealousy, and attempts to control another person's lifestyle and decisions. Did you know that, statistically, 1 out of every 3 teenagers experiences some form of emotional or physical pressure in a relationship? The Ashley Doolittle Foundation began introducing educational programs into schools, teaching students and parents how to recognize the quiet warning signs of danger before situations escalate. Ashley's family also brought her Princesses Project to life. Today, experienced rodeo participants mentor younger girls, teaching responsibility, discipline, and leadership, exactly as Ashley had planned. Ashley Doolittle's story did not end as just another true crime headline. It became a warning, a lesson, and a system of support for people who may one day find themselves trapped in a similar situation. Because behind polished achievements, smiling photographs, and the appearance of a perfect life, there can sometimes exist a hidden pattern of control, one that demands attention long before the first hammer is ever pulled back.